Well, thank you. Hopefully you're joining us again because we've been doing a roundtable every day for the last 2 weeks, picking a different subject in this reconciliation bill, and we've learned greatly from Speaker Pelosi when last time she passed Obamacare. She said, you have to pass it to know what's in it. The same thing is happening today. And the more that we learn what's in this reconciliation bill, the more that you want to defeat this reconciliation bill. But what we really want to talk about today is the taxes, the Made in America. You would think if Congress was to pass a reconciliation bill, it would enhance business in America. It would give America either a level playing field or an advantage. What this does, and especially about the global minimum tax, it gives advantages to other countries. If you have a worker or a business, you get an advantage to do it in another country than in America. And for manufacturers, just the minimum tax. If you want to put anything in Green New Deal, you want to put your solar panel, you can deduct that. But if you need to have a warehouse, if you need to manufacture, you don't get to deduct that. You've got to hit the minimum. And so really, really damaging. And then if you're an S corporation, just putting the Obamacare tax on the 3.8 now, that's a whole new problem. And so there's so many problems in this. And the worst thing about this is here we are, prior to the pandemic, having a very strong economy. More people working. We got more job offers out there right now. The incentives of what the Biden administration has been doing, letting people stay home instead of going back to work, taking the incentive away from work, has been very difficult. And so what we want to do is have a discussion. We've got some very brilliant minds around the table, and that's what we kind of want to talk about. Now, Lloyd, you're on Ways and Means. So Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution says all tax reform starts in the House and starts in Ways and Means. You've been doing a little study in this. You've been having some debates about this as well. And you're a former small businessman. So what are you seeing about and how would America turn out if this was to pass?
Well, you know, it's really amazing to me that we're still talking, passing this bill, Democrats are still doing it after Tuesday. Like they just simply are not listening to the American people. In fact, I think it's like the biggest misread of a situation since Custer at Little Bighorn. I mean, like, it's
but
crazy.
You know what? You want to know a little history? So in 2009, we had Speaker Pelosi then. And there was a Tuesday where Virginia and New Jersey both elected a Republican governor. And you know what they did 4 days later? They passed Obamacare.
Yeah.
They misread everything about it, and they're misreading it again.
Yeah, they really are. But, you know, we went through, in the Ways and Means Committee, multiple days of hearings in regards to the tax pieces in this. And initially, I don't even know how many now. As you said, we don't know what's in the bill, but there were 42 different new taxes that were proposed as part of this bill. And, you know, we were so proud. The first term that I was here was when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And we made some fundamental changes to the tax code that did what you just described, Leader, that created a level playing field that incentivized businesses to create jobs here again rather than overseas. You know, our tax policy literally incentivized.
Did you find that? Did you actually create more after our last tax bill? Invest more?
We don't have global operations.
Yeah.
So I think for us, anytime that we've got more available capital, we continue to invest it back into the business and we continue to create jobs because distribution continues to grow, and we all know now what supply chain means and are an integral part of it more so than we ever did, and how important it is to have a healthy supply chain.
Yeah. You were right. After we passed that last bill, all the headlines were everybody was getting a raise because you had more capital. They were investing, and then we heard of companies that were overseas coming back to America.
Billions of dollars invested in jobs here rather than overseas, in new plants here, and that created more business for every other business that was part of that supply chain. And so, you know, it's baffling to me that you could look at all of those statistics. I mean, we see the impact on business, but then we also had the lowest poverty rate ever in the history of the country, the highest employment ever. Why would you, coming out of this pandemic, why would you reverse the policies that have really worked? I mean, I don't know how you can look at...
Those policies are actually going to punish business or punish
exactly
to manufacture. Now, I'm gonna go to you, Lisa. I know you're a freshman, but you come out of the business sector. You've had businesses. You're in the financial world. You understand this well, where capital is king, jobs are created. What are you hearing back home? And then when you get done, I want you to introduce Katie, because I already turned to her. I didn't introduce her just because I promised Lisa could. And you have businesses in both their districts, but Lisa wins on the introduction.
Well, thank you. What we're hearing back home is the lack of logic. No one can connect the dots from the business community. I think we're in a fight with a battle of ideas right now. We have to go back to what has made America the powerhouse, the world powerhouse. It's capitalism, it's freedom, it's the ability to innovate and take risks. And I don't know why there is this bashing and negative sentiment towards business. Because if you think about it, Leader, business is the engine that actually gives you the tax revenue that we use to lift people up out of poverty, the tax revenue to provide the social programs. And what we want to do is we're trying to stifle the engine. And this is something that I learned back in college, but it works. It's called the money multiplier, right? We've all heard about it. We can raise taxes on evil business, the producers that produce the jobs, but you only get to use that tax dollar one time. The government collects that tax dollar one time, or you can incentivize business like we did in 2019, which I might add with the changes that were put in place. I think we collected more tax revenue in 2019 when we lowered the tax, I know that's a bad word, we lowered it from 35 to 21%, but we collected more tax revenue. Why? Because me as a business owner, I reinvested in my business, I made more product, I hired more people. When I hired more people, what did those people do? They went out and bought houses. They went out to lunch. They bought cars. They maybe invested their own business. And what did those do every single time with that dollar? Tax, 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 tax. Or you can give it to the government and tax it one time. This is crippling our businesses and the small business owners, the core, everyone is spitting mad. Why wouldn't we incentivize our businesses? Why are they the bad guy? Because what happens when your engine stops working? You got to go out and get a new car, and that's pretty expensive. It just doesn't make any sense.
You want to introduce our guest?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, Katie, I am very pleased to have you here with us today, and I know I'm going to get your name wrong. Paling Seymour? Paling Seymour, I apologize.
More German speakers in the room.
I'm Italian. We're the president and CEO of First Supply from the great state of Wisconsin, but you do have some Michigan ties. But sincerely, we appreciate what you do, and we want to hear from you as a business owner perspective. What are you experiencing firsthand?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Leader, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to bring our story here to all of you, and not only our story as a fifth-generation family business, but the stories of all of the people in our industry. The National Association of Wholesale Distributors invited me here, and so I'm representing all of our members who are distributors not only in my industry, but industries all across. As I said, we're fifth-generation family business based in Wisconsin, and we really are finding the importance of being able to do exactly what you talked about, is take care of the 700 families that rely on us for a job every day and really that are part of our business family. But overall, in the distribution industry, we're about a $6 trillion industry, and we employ about 5.7 million workers overall. There's a lot of people in this business, and oftentimes we don't even think about it. We have mutual friends in the business, right. Even that the tentacles are broad. But distributors overall pay a very high effective tax rate, and our margins are very tight, usually about 2% after tax. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to buying cool things like robots that help us innovate and work harder and allow more people to come into our industry. So it's really important that the capital that is available to us to be able to reinvest in those businesses and reinvest in our communities. employ people who want to give back to their communities. We want to give back to our communities and make them healthy and strong and vibrant for the future.
Well, this will affect you directly, and that it affects whether you can hire more people or not. Brian, you have an interesting background. You've been in tax policy, you've advised companies, you're on financial services, and what do you see in this bill?
I look at what is in this bill and what we've been seeing from Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden for the past 9 months is continuous policies discouraging people to work. On one side, they're paying people and discouraging them to work. On the tax side, they're discouraging businesses from investing in the United States. So the Made in America tax, what it's doing is it's shifting our production outside the United States and shifting it to China. China sits with a 25% corporate rate. So Communist China, 25% corporate rate. They wanted to move that up. On the individual rate where many businesses are paying their taxes, they want to drive that higher. They're discouraging businesses to invest in the United States. And I think, as you said, Lloyd, earlier, what was going on before the pandemic? Before we came into the pandemic, after the Trump tax cuts, we saw businesses investing in the United States, more workers going back to work, wages rising, and in particular for the lowest income workers, and across the spectrum, for blacks, for Hispanics, for Asians, for women, for veterans. Then we entered the pandemic, and what did we see? We've seen great government intervention by the President Biden and Nancy Pelosi, discouraging workers from going to work. And now, on top of that, they want to layer a tax policy that discourages job creation here in the United States. They want to encourage workers in other countries, but discourage American workers. It's incredibly disheartening. There's a dignity in work. We have far too many people that are still on the sidelines, and employers across the country are struggling to find workers. We should be putting policies in place that encourage workers to get back to work.
You're right, and the one thing that you find, it goes throughout the bill, like even when they do the child tax credit, they take away the work requirement, instead of getting incentives for people to go back to work. And now we're talking about the taxes. You work getting on a very small margin. And so if your taxes are going up, now you've got to change course and hire less. Correct. And then you also, if you're going to compete with other people, if they're sitting in another country, now they have an advantage over you. Right. So your margin's even smaller. Correct. So as you talk to people in your industry, are they concerned about what's going forward? Do they support this, or do they have a whole different opinion?
There's definitely concern about it, especially as you talked about our small margins and the inability to find people. When I'm talking with others in our industry and even us, when we think about the number of open positions that we have, it's up and down our company, whether it's in management, whether it's in our warehouses, whether it's our drivers, whether it's our salespeople. We would take people in any one of those positions today, and I think every business owner probably across the country would. So making sure that people do have an incentive to be involved in the workforce is critical to the health of all of our businesses.
How many job openings do you have right now that you can't fill?
About 50.
Oh, my gosh. Lloyd, I was just in your district recently, and we were having a discussion with a lot of your job producers, and they were telling me day over day and that they were having problems, especially supplies, truck drivers, and others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've businesses, I'm in Pennsylvania, but I have businesses that are impacted by the backup at the ports, the backlog there. One company that was there with you said 60% of their products they do not have on the shelves because they can't get it through the ports. And so there's problem after problem. I want to go back to something Brian said. We push back on this idea that you're incentivizing people not to go to work in the Ways and Means Committee with multiple amendments. We warned them that this would happen, and I think the part that's missing in the minds of the Democrats is the idea of incentives. And Americans are hardworking people. We have a system that has created more prosperity than ever before, but people respond to incentives. Businesses respond to incentives. They're going to go overseas if that's what's best for them. And why would we ever put a person in a position, they're working hard, or they're trying to provide for their family, some maybe living paycheck to paycheck. It's harder to do that when they go to work. It's just unbelievable to me that people don't understand. They're saying, oh, people are going to go to work regardless. Well, not if it's going to be harder to put food on your table. So it's these policies that are pushing jobs overseas and that are having people stay home, encouraging people to stay home and rather work, just are horrific.
And you see it, I think, time and again as you drive across the country, help wanted signs, employers looking for workers. I'm the leaders named me as the ranking member on the Select Committee on the Economy, Economic Disparity and Fairness and Growth. We did a field hearing in Lorain, Ohio. And the focus was, what are the policies that we can put in place to help people in a community that's struggling? And as we walked into the field hearing, across the street from the location that was chosen, there were help wanted signs all across the steel factory across the street. So I jumped on my phone as we were walking in and pulled up, what does the job pay? The job paid over $20 an hour, benefits starting day one, including health care, including a 401k match, and workers are still sitting in the sidelines in a town that was presented as economically challenged. And it proves the point that there's policies being put in place in Washington, and we see it time and again. Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden are discouraging workers to get back to work.
Well, you raise a good point. Like, why are we here? Why is everything costing more? Why do we have a supply chain problem? Why do we have people where you have 50 openings right there? It was the Democratic policy that gave an incentive for people to make more staying home than going to work. And when that happens, there's another reaction. So to get people to work, now you've got to raise the price. So then you've got inflation going, and then you have nothing on the shelf. It's even costing you more in the process because you can't produce it. And now they want to do a tax bill that punishes you for producing something in America.
I think you're spot on, leader. And I think one of the things that we haven't discussed yet is where our supply chain is so dependent on foreign countries. You referenced it. And I think coming into this pandemic, we were all aware, but I think everyone was painfully aware as we entered the pandemic how dependent we are on foreign countries to produce our goods, in particular communist China. And at a period of time when we should be working to bring production back to the United States, there could be nothing worse than a Made in America tax that President Biden and Nancy Pelosi are putting forward, which will simply discourage production in the United States and will make us more dependent on foreign sources for our supply chain, in particular communist China.
You know, I live in California, I see all those ships, and what I really wish, if we could change the course of what's in Congress, we can give a different incentive where those ships are not coming in to bring products, but they're taking our products to another country. We're making them here where you could produce more there. Now, we've just been joined by Byron Donalds. He's got a long history of understanding financial markets and others, served in the legislature in Florida and has done a tremendous job here in Congress. What are you hearing back home on this reconciliation and tax proposal, especially with the businesses in your community?
Well, the number one thing is that any additional burden to businesses across the country, especially from a tax perspective, is going to make it significantly harder for them just to manage their operations, let alone with some of the different dollars being given in child tax credit and the like. It's going to make it significantly harder for them to actually get the employees that they already don't have. So, I mean, the thing that's illustrative is if you look at labor participation rates in the United States, right now we're hovering anywhere between 60 to 61%, depending on the measure. For our economy to really be humming the way it needs to be, labor participation has to be around 64 to 65. If this goes through, we'll be struggling to keep 60. Because, you know, what is it for a trucker who has 3 kids, but you're getting $900 a month into your own personal checking account? Maybe I don't need the additional leg that I was taking to make ends meet. Maybe I don't need 2 or 3 of those additional legs. What does it mean for the overall supply chain? Let's take, I know we try to talk evil of the large companies, Target and Walmart, but what does it mean when they have cashiers, people who stock shelves, people in the distribution system of Target that don't need the additional 10 hours? Where they literally have a choice of picking up that extra shift or not. That has ripple effects throughout the entire economy. So when I talk to my business owners back home, that's what they're most concerned about. Our restaurant owners, they're scared to death. Especially, there's already been a move in many states. My state, unfortunately, did one of these, going to $15 an hour in minimum wage. That's going to take effect over a couple of years. Well, you couple that with tax increases, with child tax credits and the like, where are you going to get the employee base that's going to allow our economy to thrive? You're not going to get them.
Maybe I can ask you, Kate, because I think it's important for folks to think about. What are you seeing on the challenges to bring employees in to fill the job openings that you already have, and what are people doing broadly in the distribution space to address that?
honestly, a lot of it comes down to wages, right? Is that especially in our distribution centers, our drivers, our receiving, our shipping departments, people just can go across the street for 25 cents more. And there's a break point of how much we can really do to help people. So how much more we can do to pay more. I mean, it just can't keep going up and up and up.
And eventually you pass the costs on to consumers, and we're seeing those inflationary pressures across the United States and
Absolutely.
industry after industry, as goods are more and more difficult to bring in, and we're in a position to bring goods back in production back to the United States. And what do we have before us? A Made in America tax discouraging production in the U.S.
Already on the backs of, think of businesses and what they've been through in the pandemic with all the extra equipment that they need to keep their employees safe, right? They had to be productive and keep their employees safe. Not to mention, especially, you touched on it, Byron, the restaurant owners, for example. They had minimum occupancy levels, and they had a lot more restrictions and regulation that they had to adhere to, which I'm sure you did as well.
Absolutely.
And those COVID costs, so to speak, you incur. Now, with the vaccine mandates and with these taxes, to your point, I think it's going to be devastating for businesses like yours. What are you going to do? Have you thought about what you're going to do if these taxes, God forbid, and we're fighting like the Dickens to make sure that they don't get passed, but what are you going to do if some of these proposals pass?
I think you said it really well earlier, Representative McLean, that any business owner, any business leader who is successful at all wants to innovate and they want to take risks. And honestly, that's the first thing that's going to go. Because we have, like I said, hundreds of families that rely on us to be a piece of stability for them. And it won't come, that'll be the last resort, right, is that the people aren't taken care of. But we're going to have to do things differently, and we're not going to be able to invest in cool things like robots and innovating in our space and doing things differently that will ultimately make our economy better, our businesses better, our communities better. It's just going to take more time.
In the long
for those
term,
to
you're
happen.
going to lose out on competition.
Absolutely.
Because those countries that have an advantage, they're going to innovate.
Right.
And they're going to be able to produce something cheaper, better form, and you're going to have competition based upon what government is doing. That's the sad part about this, that it's government that's making you less competitive and less productive in the end.
Democrats talk a lot about fair share,
Yeah.
like the wealthy and those should be paying their fair share, but it apparently doesn't apply to businesses, because if you take the increased taxes, like 800-some billion that are part of this bill, and add that to what businesses are already paying, add the state and local taxes, we would be the highest in the world. And so, the fair share apparently doesn't apply in this arena. And it's a shame, because we have great innovative businesses that can compete with anyone across the world.
I've always
but
said-
but you got to give them a fair playing field.
If you let America be on a level playing field, we can compete and we can win. We don't need an advantage, but it's just like starting a race and we have to start 30 yards behind. How are we going to catch up? And it's our government's doing it. Now, I know we've been having this discussion for a little while here, but we have some press in the room, and I got some bright minds here that can answer the questions. So I want to take advantage of that. If you have any questions from the press, just identify yourself and go ahead and ask. Go right ahead.
Zach Halishak, Washington Examiner. For Katie, I was just wondering, this vaccine mandate that's coming down the pipeline January 4th, how is that, how do you see that's going to impact your business? Have you had any employees that have said they might, want to quit, or how's that, what are you looking at in that sense?
Yes, it's certainly going to be a complicated thing to happen. We really want to create a safe environment for our employees, regardless of what that means. And it's important to us that we've certainly been proponents of vaccination. We're not anti-vaccination by any means. But there are reasons why some of our employees may not choose to be vaccinated, and we're just going to have to manage through that.
Well, it's difficult. Where government here is one size fits all. Look what government's doing in the military on this. Now, in the military, there's 17 other vaccines you have to take, but there are exceptions. If you're breastfeeding, they don't do that today. I mean, we just had a young woman who's signed up to defend our nation. She has a baby, she's breastfeeding, but they won't give an exemption for that. Or what about an individual who has the antibodies who had COVID? I mean, when you think about this, why can't we be rational about it? The president coming in a time period, what he's done a year ago, our first responders were heroes.
Yeah.
Now we're watching what's happening in New York. We're shutting down fire stations and others. Response times are going down. That's life and death in the process as well. I think there's another way to do this than what they're doing. They just continue to seem to create punishment in the tax code and others of how they go about these items. Other questions?
Hi, Mika Solomon with the Washington Times. How do you see this tax proposal impacting U.S. competition with China in particular?
I'll let you guys start.
Which proposal?
Competition with China.
Is you're raising the tax rates in the United States, you're discouraging production here in America. It's encouraging companies to produce outside the United States, including communist China. Talked earlier about the corporate rate, right? The corporate rate in communist China is 25%. The initial proposals in this legislation had it well above that. We'll see what the final number is. But as you look at other rates, as you look at individual rates, which is where the vast majority of businesses are ultimately paying their taxes, the plan here is to drive those taxes up and tax production made in the United States, encouraging productions in places like communist China.
Two key taxes in here. The global minimum tax makes it beneficial at a lower rate to produce in China than produce in America.
Yeah.
The minimum tax, which goes directly to you or anybody else who manufactures anything. So you're going to have to pay that 15%. You can't go lower. But you can if you're buying solar panels, right?
Right.
Well, where do you buy solar panels from? Well, it's all from China. But if you're investing back in and you have to build a warehouse, you don't get to do that. So it's, again, a benefit to China than to an American company. Look, we're not saying give us an advantage. All we're saying is let's create a level playing field. And you watched what we did when we changed the tax code, when we lowered it, the corporate rate where you can compete. We took away the AMT, and what we allowed in that process, you watched companies that were literally producing in other countries move back to America.
Yes.
Now, the problem is, I'm hearing from a number of those where you can't do that just at a snap of a finger. They're going through the motion, they're thinking, whoa, maybe I should stop and go back. Because if I have a worker in another country, it costs me less. If I produce it in another country, it costs me less. So how do I compete when you're in a world competition? That is where it's a detriment to business.
And people and businesses are both logical. They are going to be able to connect these dots. And that's what you see happening.
And think what they just did to the S-Corps, right?
Yeah.
They're going to add the 3.8% of Obamacare onto them as well. I mean, it's one after another. And then their policies before have created inflation. And they can't get the supplies that they need. Well, again, that benefits China.
I think it's telling that after the TCJA was passed, prior to that, obviously a lot of operations overseas for American companies. There was not one inversion, not one company took their operations overseas after we implemented the right tax policies that incentivized the right behaviors and created jobs here.
The only thing I would add to that, these are all fantastic points, and my colleagues are 100% correct. But you have to look at what it's actually going to do, not just with companies, but what it's going to do with employees here in the United States and with the wages they're getting here. Freight costs are already rising in the United States because of a lot of the policies coming out of this administration, and frankly, some policies that are being done at state levels, which are a detriment to transportation and freight in the United States. Now you're going to make us less competitive from a tax perspective, which means there's going to be more production overseas with higher freight costs, not to mention what the White House and Joe Biden want to do with respect to the costs in the energy structure. For employees in America, even though they might get a slightly higher wage in the process somewhere along the way, the costs of the very products they're going to go buy are going to be much more expensive. That doesn't help working families. It doesn't help our companies in the United States. It completely benefits China and disadvantages us. Why would we be doing that here in America? Makes no sense.
And we're just talking about one element of the bill. Look at the other elements of the bill that they do. They take away work requirements, so less incentives to go to work. In their child care plan that they want to help people, they make those who are going to provide child care to have a college degree. Do you know how many people are going to leave the child care business? So that's going to be a bigger problem in the process. And then the mandate itself in a time when we got a supply chain problem. And we've got 100 ships sitting off of LA that can't come in, and then when they come in, they're going back empty in the process. Because you're right, Byron, the state, California won't let certain people in to pick it up on their trucks. If you're under 21, you can't go without, and then the regulations they put upon that, on the hours that you can drive, why wouldn't we waive that during a crisis? We waived it during COVID.
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, Sebastian Hughes, Daily Economy Foundation. I wanted to ask about the corporate tax rate. The tax rate that's proposed is less than the 35% that you previously mentioned. It's going to be 26.5% in this bill. Why would that devastate businesses if it used to be at a higher tax rate?
Go ahead.
Well, currently, it's at 21%. If we raise it, where do you think that has less? I'm a business owner. I have less money to spend. I'm going to spend that money less. I might not hire as many employees. I might not reinvest. Have you gone to McDonald's lately? I don't know if you've gone to fast food. Is there anyone working at the counter? No. They've automated everything. Business, you should be incentivizing businesses to do more, not penalizing them. Because the more money the businesses have, they reinvest, they hire more people, they make more widgets, they sell more products. Again, back to my money multiplier. And yes, it's lower than the 35%, but it's still higher than it was. And if our end goal is to collect more taxes, facts, not feelings, but facts show and have proven when we lowered the tax rate, we had the highest tax revenue collection in 2019. Why? Because people were working and there were more people paying into the system, and that's all driven by business.
The point I wanted to add to that was, it's important when you're considering competitive rates around the world, you add in the state and local income taxes here, and if you add all that together, prior to TCJA, we were one of the highest in the world. So no mystery why companies are taking a job overseas. They're paying less taxes on the dollars they're earning there. And then we brought it down to a very, very competitive rate. And what they're
But we just
talking-
didn't bring it down, we broadened the base.
Absolutely.
So
Yes,
now when you do
yes.
it, you hurt more that goes up. And remember, we're in a global economy, so we're competing with everybody. And this isn't just the only tax. Remember what happened when we lowered the rate? All you read about was all the pay raises people
Yeah.
were given and the bonuses. Well, now you're raising that up. Are they going to take that back from people? You got to cut somewhere now.
Leader, you're spot on. I think what's really important when you look at these tax changes is the impact that it has on workers. And so if you look at what happens after the Trump tax cuts go into effect, wages begin to rise, in particular for low-income workers, and across the spectrum, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, women, veterans. That's where we were traveling along following the Trump tax cuts going into the pandemic. Now, as we come out of the pandemic, we have an opportunity to rip the Band-Aid off and get our lives back. But instead, we're being faced with two punches. One, incentives not to work, and two, increases in taxes, making it difficult for businesses to hire workers here in the United States and encouraging production outside the United States. So I think you really need to look at the impact that it has on workers. Bringing those tax rates down has a big positive benefit to American workers. And what this bill does is puts a tax on made in American products, and it's bad for American workers.
And I can tell you, when we were when I was in business, when they lowered those tax rates, we hired more employees. This is a fact. We hired more employees. Our employees made more.
Look, the only thing I will add to this conversation is that look at it in your own pocketbook. If your tax rates go up, are you now going to have more disposable income to do the things you want to do, or potentially take the next level in things you may choose to want to do? You're going to have to plan for that in your own personal life. A business is no different. If Washington is constantly playing around with tax rates, as a company in the United States, you now have to account for, oh my gosh, what's this new administration going to do with taxes? Are they going to go down or are they going to go up? Why can't America just consistently be more competitive than everywhere else across the globe? We won't play with that. We won't play, frankly, with working families' pocketbooks like that. If that principle is consistent for a working family, why can't that be consistent for a business and a corporation? Because they plan too. Money is not just infinite. I know Washington thinks money is infinite, but money's not infinite. There is a certain amount of money that you have, that you plan for, that you move going forward. If a business decides to open up its capacity and open up more plants, they're looking at the tax rates as one of the costs associated with expansions. But if we allow for tax rates just to continue to go up from 21 to 25 or 21 to 26 or 21 to 30, the numbers aren't irrelevant, but what it tells business owners in our country is that they cannot rely on the United States to be consistent to allow them to compete in the global economy.
Good point. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Question back to the global tax rate. So, thank you. So China, along with 135 other nations, agreed to enforce the same global tax rate that you guys are referring to that Biden is pushing. So I want to know, why would the U.S. implementing this same tax rate still benefit China over the U.S.?
It's not the same tax rate. When you do the global minimum tax, China actually has a lower rate than America. When you're looking at our corporate rate, that it becomes higher than others, the competition's here. And it's not the only thing when you talk about production, cost of energy. So as we move more towards a Green New Deal, your energy costs go up and less dependent. When you look at the wage of an employee, ours is higher. When you look at OSHA, when you look at the mandates, all those go into effect to the bottom line. So when you're a business and you want to produce a product and you've got to have a return on it, if it costs you more to produce it in one country and you can't get a return on it, you're going to produce it somewhere else. And that's, in the essence, what this bill does to American business. And what's interesting, when we changed the tax code and made America more competitive and countries came home, Democrats would argue, well, government is going to suffer because the revenue is going to be less. Because our principle and philosophy are a little different. We think individuals know how to spend the money better than government, okay? What was the revenue into government this year? Even through the pandemic, $4 trillion, the most in the history. Why? Because we broadened the base, which makes it fair. We lowered it, which makes it more productive. So more people are working, more people are producing. That means more people are buying houses, more people are going to college, more people are going to school.
I mean, look, let's be very clear about this one very important fact. The purpose of tax policy is not to make things fair. And I think the misconception that comes from the Democrats and from Joe Biden is this moronic misunderstanding of economics, that tax policy is supposed to make things fair. That is wrong. Tax policy's only purpose is to raise revenue. That's it. And so what we should be doing is making sure it's consistent, it's simple, it makes sense, it's reliable, so we can compete, and then Washington won't have a money problem. We're already seeing that right now. Washington does not have a money problem. We're raising more money than we ever have.
And the point to your question, though, too, is you say China agreed to this. China has agreed to a lot of things they've never done. China agreed to buy a lot more of our exports, and they didn't follow through. In your committee, your committee offered an amendment to say America would not implement our tax code system raise until the other countries did. The Democrats voted that down. So they automatically told the rest of the countries, you don't have to implement it, America will. So, I remember I was in a high school one day, I was talking about the competitiveness of America and how we fell behind, and this one student wanted to raise their hand. They asked, well, how did this all happen? And I asked him if they played a sport. And he said, I'm a swimmer. I said, well, let me give you an analogy based upon swimming. Picture America after World War II, and we're at a meet, and we're competing with every other country. We all jump off at the same time. America wins, right? We not only win, we get out of the pool and dry off before second and third arrives. So the next year comes around for competition. We say, it's kind of unfair. We probably should raise a little higher tax. The other countries got a little more hurt during the war. And each year, we added a little higher corporate rate. We made it a little more expensive for an employee. We've got this new American tax policy that puts like a 50-pound weight on. And now we jump in the pool. Not only do we not win, we come in second and third. And you know what? People say, why don't you swim like you used to? What they really should say, take off the weight belt so you can compete in a fair competition. That's what this tax bill does. It adds more weight on a weight belt to America, competing in a swim meet with every other country. And if the other country doesn't have to carry all the heavy burden of the taxes, they get to swim faster and they get a better return. I want to thank everybody. Katie, especially thank you for the work you do. I don't know if you could have the final comment, question, hope, dream?
I think one thing that's really important for hopefully all of you remember is you talked about the tax base, the broadening of the tax base. Most businesses, like you talked about, big businesses, not all businesses are big businesses. Most of the businesses in our country are family businesses, small to mid-sized businesses, employing millions and millions of people in our country. And that's incredibly important that these types of changes outsize impact to those small and mid-sized businesses, those restaurants, and all of the families that rely on them, and the communities. Who's sponsoring the back of the soccer T-shirt? It's the restaurants, it's the car dealerships, it's the small and mid-sized businesses in our communities, and it's so important that these types of provisions aren't weighing those down and those businesses aren't going out of business because they can no longer keep up and they can't participate. So keeping those small, mid-sized businesses strong in our country is so important.
Very good message. Thank you all. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to another roundtable tomorrow.
Thank you.